Up until now on the podcast series, we have listened to an array of impressive creators in writing, scholarship, teaching, filmmaking, music, performing arts, entrepreneurship, faith, and even parenting. If you haven't listened to all of these, I encourage you to go back and listen to past episodes. They are with some amazing folks. One thing we haven't done, however, is to explore what creativity is from a psychological viewpoint, and that's what's going to happen today. Keep listening as I talk with Dr. Alicia Briganti, Associate Professor of Psychology, and Dr. Travis McKie-Voerste, Assistant Professor of Psychology, both of Dalton State College, about what really goes on when we use our creativity. Welcome back to Dialogues with Creators. Today, we will have a conversation, not just a dialogue, because we have two guests, both colleagues of mine. First, I want them to introduce themselves as they would like, because they're obviously capable of doing so. First, Dr. Alicia Briganti. Alicia, tell us about yourself, especially something about your story, as they say, towards getting to Dalton.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. I want to first thank you for inviting me to do this. I've actually never done a podcast before, so I'm excited to do it. Yes, my name is Alicia. I am from Louisiana. I'm still in the South. I spent, all of my life in the South, just 3 different states. Born and raised in Louisiana. I received my bachelor's degree in psychology from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. After that, I left and went to the University of Texas at Austin and received my master's degree in developmental psychology. And then I transferred back to LSU to finish my PhD, which I got in cognitive developmental psychology. So all areas of psychology, but mainly focused on cognitive and developmental. Those are two R1 research heavy universities. So I did a lot of research while I was at both schools. And during my time at LSU, I got the opportunity to serve as a teaching assistant. And after receiving my master's and taking a teaching seminar course, I was then given the opportunity to teach my own classes as instructor of record, Introduction to Psychology and Child Psychology. And I realized that I had more passion for teaching than just strictly research. And so that is how I got to Dalton State College. In my job search, was applying to schools that were more teaching focused. And so I applied at Dalton State as one of the options, got offered, and have been here since 2013.
That's interesting that you were at UT Austin. Mm-hmm. Who did you study with there?
Dr. Les Cohen. So I did research with infants at UT Austin.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, which is an experience in and of itself, because, typical research, you have participants come in, whether it's a survey they can fill out or an interview that they can answer questions or doing some kind of type of experiment. You can't do that with infants. And so that was a neat experience, but it can also be frustrating at times.
Well, can I just ask quickly what kind of experiment you would do, or research, I shouldn't say experiment, but with a baby?
Yes. And I guess you can say a creativity applies here, because coming up with ways to ask and answer questions about infant development requires, some amount of creativity, thinking outside the box. With infants, we use a lot of measuring looking behaviors. So what they're looking at, how long they're looking at stimuli. So the length of time can suggest things about what's familiar versus what's not, because infants love to look at things that are new. Once they get familiar with something, they become bored and they stop looking at it. Right. And we also use a similar procedure to look at preferences. So you put up 2 different stimuli on a screen and just measure where the infants are looking and for how much time at each. So it's a lot of looking time measurements.
Oh, okay. I guess, yeah, I can see where that would be frustrating because they're not exactly going to understand what you want or work.
Yeah, so it's a lot of inferencing.
Yeah, they wouldn't care either.
But the frustrating thing is babies become fussy. And so once they start crying or fall asleep, you can no longer use their data.
How old was the oldest one you worked with?
It ranges from 14 to 18 months.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow, that's neat. Didn't know that about you. Okay. That's when you say cognitive and developmental. I wasn't thinking babies, but yes, that would be where you would start. Okay. So that's Alicia. What about you, Dr. Travis McKie-Voerste? He is also in the Department of Social Sciences at Dalton State College. So tell us something about your journey to where you are now.
Boy, it's been a long one. I also thank you, by the way, for inviting me on this podcast. I love the question of creativity ever since you sort of introduced that. And, I've had lots of opportunity just to sort of ponder on, what is that? What is the question? How does creativity sort of play a role in my life? And I definitely think just even the question, like, where do you come from is such an important question, and how does that influence my own creativity? And our different backgrounds, I think, certainly influence that. And I think I do have lots of different perspective because of some of my background that I'll share with here. But I'll start from when I was 14 months old, I guess. No, but I was born in Minnesota. I don't remember that particularly, but when I was about 4 years old, we moved to Germany, where my father's family is from, and then I spent my up to my teenage ages in Germany till I was 15. So I grew up speaking German, went to German public school. And I think that even just sort of language and sort of how we form language, I think is something that that influences me to this day when I do math, because I learned math in German. I think in German when I'm doing my multiplication tables, because that's how I learned them. And so then when I was 15, I moved to Minnesota. My mother was in Minnesota, so I went to high school there. Got made fun of for my German accent for a little while, so I don't have that anymore. Then I went to school in Minnesota. I got my bachelor's degree from Bemidji State University. That's the first university on the Mississippi, I guess, way up there. And then I went to Arkansas after that, where after I met my wife, she was studying for her PhD in Arkansas. And so I went to Arkansas, followed her there, and got a specialist degree in psychology and counseling. In between that time, actually after my bachelor's degree, I worked lots of different jobs. Like while I was going to school, I supported sort of myself and family during that time, doing lots of different things. I was a roofer for a while. That made me appreciate academia. I've done lots of small jobs, and I say that because I think all these experiences definitely influence like how I think about things, and how I do things. And then after that, we moved to Dalton after my wife was offered a job at Dalton State. During that time, I was working as a mental health therapist, first in the community, then at Dalton State as a head of the counseling center, until I took a teaching position as well. I still continue to have a private practice on the side. I think there's a lot of value in doing and teaching. So, I think that, again, helps form how I think about teaching and learning and what I can share with students as well. So that's how I got to Dalton.
Okay. Let me back up a little bit. I think that's fascinating what you said about the German, because You may not have a German accent, but you definitely have a Minnesota one. I've always found that a very distinct one. And let me go back. What classes do you particularly teach? Well, I mean, I guess both of you teach intro to psych. That's kind of like in my department, everybody teaches public speaking course.
Right.
Yeah, but
I didn't finish up with the, I did, my PhD from University of Georgia. Right. During that time as well. But so my sort of the upper division courses that I teach are personality, which I'll definitely talk about, personality theories as it comes to creativity. I think that's definitely how I frame creativity in some of the, and I'll mention some of the personality theorists here as we continue our conversation about personality theories. Abnormal psychology, I think that fits more sort of in that clinical aspect and sort of the specialty course, psychology of religion, is one of the upper division courses I teach.
Okay. And Alicia, what about you?
Yes. In addition to teaching the Intro to Psychology course, every so often, I actually don't teach it as often as my colleagues, I teach human development every semester. And then on a rotating basis, I teach child psychology and then adolescent psychology. And I teach cognitive psychology. Those are the ones I teach most often.
Okay. All right. So that gives the listeners an idea of, where you guys are situated there in academia, as we say. Okay. So moving on, many of the people I've had on the podcast, and that's about 23 people so far, I think your numbers 23 and 24, are what is now called, a term I do not like, a creative. And that is not a word I've used, but I just use the word creatives, and that's what we're doing here. You all are both creators in various places in life, especially in the classroom. But I wanted you on because I think you have insights into what creativity is, where it comes from, and how it operates. I'd like to start with you, Travis. From your education, research, and experience, what is your understanding of creative processes and its origins? And that is like the worst question in the world, and I'm sorry, but it'll give you a lot to jump off on.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, as you introduced or the podcast and the idea, I've been thinking about really what does that mean to be creative, and I think I mentioned that I pull a lot from personality theory as I was thinking about this, and specifically about this idea of these different constructs that we develop. And Alicia will talk about maybe the developmental aspects behind this, but so just the ideas that we develop about what the world is like. When we think about the early questions, what do we pay attention to? And once we sort of understand, like, hey, this is sort of my understanding of this specific topic, I think there's some variation in the flexibility to which those constructs then later get applied to different aspects of the world. If we think about, what's the difference between a cat and a dog, that's for us, that's an easy question in some ways in our minds, but when you go to describe it, it becomes much more difficult. And then when we see an animal that maybe looks like, hey, that looks like a dog, we're applying a construct that we have about what a dog is like to a new organism. And we can apply that to lots and lots of different things. Like when we apply it to, hey, that house or that cloud looks like a dog. Some people are much more able to, I think, apply some of those constructs to lots of different things. And some are much more constrained in what they apply those ideas to. And I think to me, that is one of the essential pieces of creativity. To others, it may just seem crazy, right? Like, what do you mean that cloud looks like a dog? That cloud looks like a cloud. Clouds come in different shapes. And to others, it's very easy to see that. And they have flexibility to what they can apply those constructs to. And, when you're talking about education, I think that's one of the big questions in education. I think we all have had students come to us and say, gosh, I'm not really quite sure on why I have to learn this, right? I'm not going to be able to apply this ever in my life. And I think that's sort of a narrowing of that construct that we're trying to broaden. If you can create a sentence in a different way, that allows you to apply problem solving in other aspects of your life, not just in composing a piece of literature, but to thinking about what are other ways I can solve this problem that's in front of me. So I think the more different and varied experience that we have, like language, I think language and culture is such a great place to learn from. From being not just bilingual, but bicultural. When I read a text, I've read the same text in different languages and understand that even if you translate the words, the meanings are different because they have different cultural contexts. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, another aspect of that creativity. If I can think about it from a different perspective, if I can take these different experiences and apply them to new ones, I think that to me is creativity.
Right. Oh, you just opened up a big can of worms for me because, in my field, it gets more into the linguistics and, even something that some languages have gender versus English doesn't, German has 3, but advanced languages have 2. So that's a great, I'm going to have you all back later next season. But then the idea of how culture, the old Saper-Whorfian thing about culture and language and how they're connected. And it always fascinates me that some languages have words for concepts that in English we don't have, and vice versa. I remember Dr. Min, who's Chinese, saying that the Chinese do not have a term for, I don't feel comfortable with that, because they're a more collectivist society. So for someone to say, I don't feel comfortable with that just doesn't fit into that, So being bilingual, and this is, is why I get frustrated with people not wanting to know other languages, even just start to learn them, because that does open your creativity so much more in any kind of cross-cultural experience. I'm obviously believe in that a lot. That's that flexibility. And, I think all of us in college teaching, I don't think it matters what the discipline, get those students that are like, why don't I have to study this? I mean, I know the math people probably get it the worst, which is sad because it's just sad. But we get it for everything. Why are we taking these classes? I want to be at this. It doesn't have anything to do with this subject I'm in. It's like, and to me, it's a limitation on an understanding that the brain is not a zero-sum game, so to speak, that the brain is limited. You can only hold this much in your head. So in order for you to put anything else in there, it's going to displace it. No, that's not how it works. But somehow people get that idea that they can only hold so much, and it's, thank you so much for that. You talk about the dogs and the cats. Okay, this is my thing. It's a fox. What is that?
Nobody knows.
Yeah. Is it a dog or a cat? So, and I guess that kind of falls into with children and how they're learning too. So, we'll come back to that. But Alicia, what, from your educational perspective, how do you see the understanding of creative processes and their origins and such?
Well, I'll start off by saying I agree a lot with what Travis was saying, especially starting young. Vast experiences is important, and especially during, playtime and the just what we give children during playtime and how we quote unquote allow them to use it, or just even everyday tasks in the household. I know that when my son, who's now 7, was younger, when he was trying to first start doing things on his own, I had to stop myself from telling him, oh no, that's not how you do it. Because why why does he have to do something the same way that I learned how to do it? If he finds a way that, makes it easier for him or whatever. And so just stepping back and allowing children to figure things out on their own, to a certain extent, obviously, while also making sure that they're doing things in a safe way. But yeah, so just giving them different experiences, different materials to work with. I think in culture, as was mentioned, also plays a role. Here, I think we have a lot of products, toys that were made to be played with in a more or less specific way, which could sort of hinder creativity versus just giving kids objects and then letting them figure out what they want to do with them. And so how we advertise toys and how you should, play with them or in things like that. So yeah, from a developmental perspective, that's one thing I was thinking about. Culture, I also think influences sort of how we even evaluate like what is creative. And so I think that's a tricky thing. I think that's, subjective for me to be able to say, oh yeah, that's creative, but something else isn't. And culture can play a role in that too. We perceive ideas of creativity, through our culture and the experiences that we had growing up.
That's a whole question itself is it possible to define the word creative? And the American Psychological Association basically says it's more complicated than this, but it says it's something new, but it's also something that is useful or recognized as of some sort of usefulness or value to people, so that it is new, it hasn't been done before, even if it's just a little bit of a tweak on something, which is usually the case. But it also, other people have to at some level have to recognize it, it has to fit. It's kind of hard to explain. I don't mean that it's useful, you can make money out of it, just that other people have to have some connection with it, that's kind of basically what they say. But that's just one view of it. Why can't it just be something new? Why can't it just create me? And for the child, I think that's a great example, because the child isn't worried about whether somebody thinks it's new or recognizes it as creative or anything. The kid's just having a good time. And there's all kinds of great things going on in their brains as it's happening, and their motor skills and stuff. So
I just want to mention maybe the cultural differences in the value of creativity as well. Like Alicia was saying, I think we sort of do a lot to limit creativity in many ways, right? When you're not following the rules, we have this set of rules that exists specifically within a culture, and sometimes very small cultures, family cultures, school cultures, that when somebody operates outside of that, one definition of that, hey, is they're being creative. And the other definition is they're not following the rules, right? They're not coloring in the lines. They are not, they're not coloring the plant the right colors, right? Purple trees don't exist. So you're not allowed to color your tree purple. So I think we have a very difficult relationship with creativity. Sometimes we value it and we're saying, wow, that's so creative. And the other times, like, no, that's too creative, right? We don't stop being so creative.
Yeah.
And obviously cultural differences. And I think we may have to find a better balance there.
Mm-hmm. I was particularly, I kind of figure you guys know a whole lot more about the brain. So from your study of brain structures, is there a certain place that creativity comes from, or is it a whole brain thing? Or am I just thinking about this wrong, which is totally possible because I'm not a neurologist or a neuroscientist. Is there a part of the brain that is more part of the creative process, or is it a holistic thing?
the idea of, right brain, left brain,
Oh yeah,
largely a myth. So hopefully no one is going in that direction. And that I would say, it's more like the whole brain. So another myth is that we only use 10% of our brains.
Oh yeah.
That's not true either. And so most things we do is requiring most parts of our brain. We may not be using our entire brain 24/7, but most of the time we're using a large portion of it, because the brain regions work together. It's not just one part of the brain that's responsible for creativity, or, memory or language or whatever you want to insert.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I think of it more, and this is a topic that does come up in cognitive psychology. And I think of it more as networks. So neurons communicating with one another, and these neurons are, situated all over the brain, and it's the communication. So networks operating sort of as a team to induce, I don't know if that's the right word, but to spark creativity. Mm-hmm. So, different sort of networks responsible for different parts of the overall function. Some of them help, to generate ideas, because that's a large, maybe the beginning stages of creativity is just being able to come up with something new, novel that hasn't already been done, ideas. And maybe the first ideas that you come up with aren't really that novel, but those ideas will then generate other ideas. So I don't know if this is going to come up later, but I was listening to the podcast that you did with one of our other colleagues, Marina Smitherman. And in that one, unconsciousness came up. And so that playing a role in possibly, like, sometimes you're trying to figure out or solve a problem, or come up with a solution, and you can't, but you stop thinking about it for a while. And then at some point, something comes to you. And so there's something about sort of just sitting on an idea or a solution. They like to use a term, incubate. Mm-hmm. And so that might, our brain is sort of working in the background. So even if we're not, consciously thinking about it, our brain may still be working on, a problem.
And that's the whole thing of sleeping too.
Right.
I've been reading Matt Walker's book on sleeping, and it's just fascinating, what's going on when you sleep and the need for sleep. And we won't get off on that one, but people would think it's, I like to sleep. Well, yeah, you
sleep,
do.
Yes. Sleep is so important for so many things.
Yeah.
But in like daydreaming,
right.
Sometimes our mind wanders, and, just letting your mind wander sometimes can lead to other things. Another network that I sometimes talk about is termed like the salience network. So even if you are in like a daydream state, or if you're focusing on something, if there's something that catches our attention, then, we might come out of that daydream. But the salience network is like when the brain, it's sort of like your brain is scanning, and then it stops when something important sort of stands out. So, think about driving and needing to notice when someone suddenly slams on their brake, that should catch our attention, or some loud noise off to the side. And so you look to see what that is, so that you can, evaluate whether that's something that you actually need to pay attention to. And then the executive control. So that's, the part of our system that helps us to plan, make decisions, sort of oversees the decision making, in the context of some larger goal, which may be problem solving. So plan, monitor, and execute those goals. And so that system may help to connect the other two in the overall sort of behavior of being creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one book that I read a long time ago that it really helped me with this was by a fellow with a name that's very hard to pronounce, Success Mohalia. And he talks a lot about divergent, which is the coming up with the ideas, versus the convergent, which to me is what is more along the executive function. But I really appreciate you saying what you did. I also want to throw in here that the idea of learning styles is not supported by the research.
Correct.
But it's, these are things that you hear in popular culture that are, things that are supposed to be true that we know aren't, but they have a certain attractiveness to people. Of course I have a learning style. Now you have a learning preference, but you learn always. You don't just learn by one way. And then the only use 10% of the brain, that means I'm really smart. I'm smarter than what I'll think I'm.
Tap into all of it.
And then the unconscious thing is, what's going on when we're not aware of what's going on, in a sense. So, those are really cool. You want to add to that, Travis?
Yeah, I was thinking about your original question about is it localized or is it everywhere? And I certainly agree with Alicia that it's everywhere. Our brain is creative. Our brain is so creative it really doesn't even care about reality, right? Like it just makes it up, right? Like and optical illusions, I think, are a great example of that. Blind spot in our eye, like our brain just fills it in, right? If it doesn't know what goes there, we'll just put some stuff there. It just sort of makes it up from context clues and those kind of things. So, our without creativity, our brain really wouldn't work. It's just utilizing those networks. And I think that kind of goes back to that point. Like if you have specific networks in place already, that gives you the foundation for new experiences. Whenever we have a new experience or a new experience, by the way, I don't just mean out in the world, but a new experience is a new thought, right? When we have a new thought, a new idea, we're utilizing existing networks that are in place. Perhaps we're strengthening them by utilizing them. But the more experiences really that we can have, and I think that brings your point up earlier that you said, hey, we're not wasting space here when we're learning something new. It's not that we've now limited our capacity that we have on our data card to learn something new. We've actually expanded our ability to utilize existing networks that are there to learn something new. When I teach a concept, I love this. Like when we are teaching about neurons, sometimes, I try to, we use different analogies like light switches and stuff like that. And most people have experiences with light switches. Well, we're using different neural pathways to explain a new concept. Sometimes that doesn't work for people. And so I like to utilize different experiences like, hey, how do you understand this concept? Especially when I have some students that are like, I still don't get it. I'll have one of the students explain it. Give them an analogy. What is the neural network that you're utilizing to understand this concept? I try to explain it maybe in 2 to 3 different ways. And then I have a student say, oh, it's like a Christmas tree or something like that. And it doesn't make any sense to me, but I'll have a few students like, oh yeah, that's what it's like. Well, they're utilizing neural pathways that they already have to understand a new concept. Is that creativity? I think so. Right. Like,
yeah.
So, and I think that maybe brings up your point of, who gets to judge what creativity is? It has utility for at least that person, maybe not anybody else. But our entire brain is we're just a creative machine, really. Sometimes to our detriment. Sometimes to our detriment of being able to detect and understand really what reality is like. Really not that good at detecting reality. We have to have all sorts of tools like science to make sure that we're on the right path here. That's why we have, lots of different belief systems that maybe have some utility for us, but not in all cases. So,
oh wow, there's a lot there. the idea of that the whole brain is, I think going back to the pop culture kind of ideas about the brain is so many times you'll hear people say, well, this little part over here does this. It's the lizard brain, or this little thing is the thing that does, X, Y, Z. And like you say, the left brain, right brain thing, and the right brain is creative. And so if you're left-handed, that means you're creative and artistic. What? And if you're left brain, you're going to be really logical and so a lot of us bought into that when we were younger because it sounded so brilliant and so whatever. But
I'm phrenology, really.
yeah, it's a type of phrenology, bumps in our heads. So as we get into this, caught in that, it's a mental model in a sense of, okay, this does this and this, and so it has some utility, but it's like we've been talking about. The analogies are great, but at some point analogies break down. They don't always work, but they'll have utility. So we use our brain's creativity to create the analogy to work until something better comes along to really understand the concept. I would say that would be the case with your students. They understand the concept and they keep going until they get better at understanding the whole thing. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is especially in the arts for people who are musicians, for example. I mean, to be a decent musician, you have to practice a great deal. And, we hear the Angela Duckworth thing, you have to have 10,000 hours of practice and that kind of thing. And as a novelist, I was told that I had to write 1 million words of fiction before I would be any good. Thank you very much. So I've done that. So I guess I'm good now. I don't know. But it's the idea that we are creating those neural pathways in the artistic thing that we do, or what's a sport. You have to practice golf, swing 10,000, Lord help us on that one, but 10,000 hours to get good at it. So, okay. From a daily life situation though, how does that, we've touched on this. How does creativity help us function in the world? For you personally, what, beyond your teaching, or even in your teaching, how do you see creativity happening in your life, especially teaching young adults? And some of us are getting older than they are.
I mean, just on an everyday basis, just, navigating through the environment, especially when something happens that you're not expecting. So even, taking your normal route somewhere and, is blocked. So what am I going to do now? Just things like that. In regards to, I think especially when I apply it to my job in teaching, I'm always trying to come up with different ways to either explain a concept or different ways to engage students in the class. And I think creativity, so not doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. There's lecturing is getting a bad rep right now, and I don't think it's lecturing itself that is necessarily a problem, but what are you doing in the context of lecturing? And so, if you're just getting up there and you're restating the same information that students carried in the textbook, then yeah, maybe that can be an issue. But if you're not restating, but if you're explaining things in a different way, coming up with activities for students to be able to apply it in novel ways, having them come up with their own examples. So I think creativity in that way can empower students and instructors to express, their ideas and their opinions in unique ways. Mm-hmm. And then touching on something I think Travis said about creativity, or the either you're being creative or you're not following the rules, and I think we see that a lot, in education, and why students feel like they maybe can't express their unique ideas that usually are coming from their experiences that we said in the beginning is important. And so if a student especially the reliance on grades and having to do it the right way, which in their minds might be, a certain way. And so that stifles their ability to be creative. And so in my own life, I try to come up with ways that students can express their creativity, but at the same time, showing that they understand the concepts that they need to understand. Mm-hmm. I think we're lucky in that we teach psychology because I'm constantly telling my students, okay, think about this. How does it apply to your life? Where have you experienced this? And then, that allows them to think about it in their own way. I'm not sure if that actually answered your question.
Yeah, it did. So just for you, Travis, whether it's in your profession or because you said you also do counseling, and I know obviously you can't get into that, but except in a generic way, but and just in your everyday life, where do you see, are you ever surprised by your creativity? I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. You're just like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, I think there's a piece where we have to allow that to happen. Alicia has mentioned, I mentioned, that we have so many constrictions that sort of are placed on, what are you supposed to do, right? And I think this comes up all the time for people. Like, I don't know, maybe you have an idea in a meeting or something like that, and you have to make the decision. It's like, oh, do I share that, or is that just too weird? Right. And hey, where did that thought come from? And you have to sort of allow that creativity to be expressed as well. I mean, I think we can have creativity, but then there's sort of that expression and people are scared of that as well. Like, what will happen if I express myself that way? And if we've had that experience of, drawing a purple tree, like I said, and I've had people that say, you did that wrong. That also now creates the idea of what happens when I don't follow the rules. What happens when I am creative? And so that really stifles people. And so from a mental health and the counseling perspective, I see that all the time. I think that might be one of the biggest things that people are worried about, that I'm going to get rejected if I show myself to the world. And so I really do think that creativity is something that people are really sometimes quite terrified of, because they see this is what the world expects of me, but that's not how I am. And that creates a lot of that conflict, and I think my role as a therapist is a lot of times to normalize some of that, to allow some of that freedom of expression, to play around with some of those ideas. I mentioned, sort of personality theorists, and one of the personality theorists that I really like was George Kelly. And he talks about that, if we want to understand why a person does something, it's because of the way that they anticipate the consequences that are going to happen. This is what they think is going to happen when I do that. If I think, hey, I'm going to be creative, I'm going to draw this and then I will be criticized, now I'm less likely to do that. If I think that's going to be appreciated, I'm more likely to do that. Whether they are accurate in that, and this is again where our brain can deceive us, our brain makes up a reality of what things are going to be like. When we imagine this is going to be the consequence, so therefore I'm not going to do that, that reality is very real to the individual. We act on our perceived reality, not necessarily what is going to happen in the real world. And so when people have that ability to be in an environment where they can express themselves and maybe play around with that, to think, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe if I share this idea, this will be appreciated. Maybe if I allow this idea to continue, that I also have voices in my mind of, other people that maybe have criticized me in the past. Maybe if I stifle that a little bit, maybe this will be okay. We base our expectations about what is going to happen based on our past experiences, even when our situations change, all the way back sometimes to our childhood experiences. Even though we're now, maybe adults, or we're in a different job where we have different bosses, different colleagues, different friends, different partners. We sort of take a lot of that baggage, we call that, right, with us, and make some anticipation. If I tell my partner this is how they're going to react, or if I better not say something. So, if we can sort of free that, I think that's when we sort of allow the creativity to exit maybe the brain and come into the real world. To manifest itself in maybe a behavior, a different behavior that challenges what we thought is going to happen.
So I like what you're saying. There's a lot of meat there for both of you. I think sometimes that we are far more creative than we give ourselves credit for, but we have told us these, I don't know, call them lies, but we've told ourselves these things that would stifle or constrain our expression. And obviously there has to be, some boundaries, but still, we won't speak out in a meeting because, so-and-so's here and they're going to, criticize me, or they're going to knock me down, or lack of confidence in it, or whatever other reason to keep from, the creativity is there, but it's not shared with anybody, so there's a whole lot there. That's pretty interesting.
Can I add something? Because I'm thinking of it from the teaching perspective. And I think sometimes as instructors, we try something in the classroom and then either it works or it doesn't, or it's mixed. And so you get your student evaluations back, and some students really loved it. Some students hated it, and probably the minority hated it, but that's what you focus on.
Yes.
And so you don't do it again, or you don't try to improve it because you focus on, the one or two negative comments. And I think that's just an issue that we have, it's human behavior, the negativity bias. That's what we focus on.
Yeah. I think we could do a whole podcast on student evaluations. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that we have allowed them to be far too constraining in trying new things, because I have found, and I've been teaching for a long time, that you really have to do a new thing or a new class 3 times at least before you get it to where it's right, to where it's going to work for everybody. You got to refine it. You got to say, okay, I need to tweak it. And, how do I apply this, et cetera? I have to rewrite the assignment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not always the first time. It's a great idea, but it just needs refinement. So, I think you're absolutely right. We allow one piece of criticism to have some sort of effect on us that really shouldn't. So back to what I was going to say about the learning community, with Alicia, a couple of years ago, I interviewed you and 3 of your colleagues about a project that you had engaged in with learning communities. You and another professor, Dr. Randall, had taught more or less the same students in 2 classes. You taught the Intro to Psych, and she taught the Comp 1, English Comp 1. The other pair taught an English Comp 2 class, which is literature-based, and U.S. history after the Civil War. And it was a fascinating conversation. Excuse me. And now you're working as the assistant director for the Center for Teaching. Excuse me. You're working as the assistant director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Dalton State. What have you seen about creativity and working it with CETL and working in faculty or professional development with other faculty?
Well, I want to address first the learning communities. So that was something that we had done, and it was considered a high impact practice. And so, it was two different classes that were connected just by the fact that the same students enrolled in both classes. But what was different about that is that the assignments that were, that the students had to do in the composition class tied into what they were learning in the psychology class. And students seemed to enjoy that because they felt that the composition assignments had more meaning for them because they connected to something that they were already learning. And usually it also had something to do with like themselves. So they were able to apply to their own life. One of them, we mentioned sleep earlier. One of the assignments was to keep a sleep journal. And we connected that to the part of when we talked about sleep in the psychology class. And then they wrote about what they learned about, their sleep habits and, why if they got too little sleep, how that might affect, their cognitions, their ability to concentrate, their ability to take an exam. And so they found more value in writing about something like that because they could apply it to themselves, but they also were able to take things that they were learning in the psychology class and add it to their essay. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of how those two classes were tied together. And I do think that allowed for a bit more, creativity in the assignments that we were using for the two classes. Mm-hmm. So how could we connect these two classes together so that students found value in them?
So in a sense, he put you in a situation where you had to rethink. Maybe, at least I can especially see it from an English standpoint, mm-hmm. had to rethink meeting the same outcomes, but finding a different way, which is mm-hmm. really what problem solving is all about. So, yeah.
Yeah. It was really fun. My work with CETL. Yeah. So I was serving as a CETL fellow for the past 2 years, where I would offer programming related to teaching and learning. And I'm starting a new role this next year as assistant director. I think of CETL as sort of a resource that instructors can use to explore their creativity. So hopefully, we're building it back up after a period where we didn't have it. And so hopefully our colleagues will start to find the value in what we're offering and what it can be used for. But we're there to, offer or help instructors come up with, solutions to issues that they might be having in their classroom. Yeah. So, someone's having trouble getting their students to participate and they've tried all sorts of things. They're not sure, what else they can do. And so maybe they come to one of us and we don't tell them what to do, but we might be able to point them in different directions, towards other resources where they can come up with something else to try. So I think as educators, we have to give ourselves permission to be creative as well as, asking our students, to be creative. And so that's sort of how that's how I see the center, as a place where instructors can go to brainstorm, try to solve issues that are coming up in their classroom. Figure out, maybe you don't know, what active learning is or how to implement that in the classroom or with assignments. And so we're a resource where we can help you figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Outside of your professions, your work, etc., where's a place where you use your creativity?
I was trying to think of where I don't use this.
Good question. Okay.
No, because
let me ask you that you enjoy it. It gives you joy.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. I mean, maybe in the very real sense of the real sense of the word, to create something that I can see that I can touch does still give me a lot of pleasure. I think, in education, a lot of times we do a lot of abstract things, we're spending a lot of time thinking, even as a therapist, a lot of times we don't really get to see the change that we're helping facilitate. So to create something, to build something is something that I still very much like. I'm constantly working on projects and to sort of stand back and to be able to see something that I've made is very rewarding. I think I think we do that in so many different ways. Like we have to be careful. Like I was thinking about parenting in some ways. Like we have to be careful with that because there's that balance of sort of allowing I think our kids to become who they are as opposed to creating something, right? Like we influence, maybe we nourish and sort of see what happens and appreciate maybe what happens without it's like, oh, they didn't turn out the way I wanted them to be. I think that's what we have to be careful there. But with Solar, we imagine things, right? Like I think that's a fun thing that people do. They look at kids and they're like, oh, what are they going to be like when they grow up? And then we get to see and appreciate that stuff. But I definitely try to include creativity in my life. I play music. Like I said, I build things. I like things where I get to play around, right? Like I fly. I like, I'm a pilot. So the part of it that I like is like, ooh, I get to we'll go check that out over there. And I get to make a decision there. I scuba dive and I get to check things out and, move in different directions that I normally get to in an everyday life. Most of our lives are already 2-dimensional. So I like that 3-dimensional space that I get to occupy or, I've played around with different art sculptures and those kinds of things. So, lots of
the tangible.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I like both. I like pondering things, and I think there's a balance between those things. But to exercise lots of those neurons that I have, part of my motor neurons, and those other things, is thoughts and ideas and.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Alicia, what about you?
Well, I have to say I'm not nearly as interesting as Travis.
I
don't have all those hobbies he's talking about. I'm constantly reading things that, aren't necessarily for work. They don't have to be work related. I feel like I'm constantly sort of building that knowledge that can lead to creativity. But I was thinking more along of my son and watching him. And I think he sort of motivates some, creativity, because trying to figure out activities to do with him or, us together working on something. Okay, how are we going to do this, or how are we going to solve that? Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of it along those lines of seeing it through, his eyes. He's 7 right now, so he's learning a lot, and that in and of itself is fun to watch. See how he comes up with things.
Mm-hmm. Especially, especially since you studied developmental psychology too. So, do you ever use him as an example in your lectures?
So, I actually this past year made some videos, but I keep finding myself missing the ages. He'll be past a milestone and be like, oh, I should have videoed him when he was the right age for this. And so, yeah, I've done it when I remember to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to thank you two for being with us. We've been discussing the human mind, creativity, the brain, and its place as in our human lives on this podcast with Dr. Alicia Briganti and Dr. Travis McKie-Voerste, both psychology faculty at Dalton State College. If you've enjoyed this talk, please share it with friends and write us a review. Thank you for listening.